Here we are, another episode of State of Play, a editorial geopolitical news show hosted by yours truly. So, kind of going to go off script right here because the NATO summit just ended. Like, this was the last day of the NATO summit where everybody came together to talk about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and democracy and Western values and stuff. And the whole thing was kind of ludicrous. We learned that Jordan is going to get a new NATO installation. It's going to be kind of like a liaison office because apparently the North Atlantic Treaty Organization should be in the Middle East, because NATO was originally founded to like fight off Russia. But anyways, we're not even going to worry about that. We'll probably get into it Monday after we've had time to digest what actually happened there. But just in the meantime, while you guys are sitting down and powering up your laptops or whatever, this moment just happened about less than an hour ago.
President of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin.
Whoops. Yep. He's got the nuclear codes. President of Ukraine's Putin, kind of ironic in ways we really won't get into. But anyways, we'll be circling back to the NATO summit and what that means probably Monday. We're trying out Thursday night. So hello, welcome. Come on in. The water is nice. Okay, so today, June 11th, we've been told that if you want to change a system, you have to do so from the inside. If you have a complaint, you should lodge it through the proper channels. Now, however, witnessing the enormous violence in Gaza that is at odds with the general will of the electorate, many are questioning whether or not those proper channels are simply bureaucratic dead ends or like Orwellian memory holes. And if you haven't read the novel 1984, memory holes exist in government offices and are like small chutes, like next to a desk. That lead to a large incinerator and are used to destroy documents and other items that contradict the government's beliefs and policies. Everything's getting more sci-fi dystopian right now. So we're also going to show you one thing that really brings that point home in a minute. But we're not there yet where we have these memory holes, where there is an official mechanism for the deliberate or alteration or disappearance of inconvenient or embarrassing documents, photographs, transcripts, etc. But we are told only to use proper channels, and I don't want to go out on a limb here, but I'd like to posit that the powers that be control the proper channels, so they're pretty sure that they won't work. So go ahead and lodge your complaint. We're happy that our workers have an outlet to vent their frustration. It's important for morale and really increases productivity when they actually think they have a voice in anything. But anyways, tonight on State of Play, we explore this question with Maryam Hassanein, a Biden political appointee, who recently resigned over the administration's Gaza policy. Does mass dissent internally affect policy? Or is one simply just compelled to follow one's own conscience, even if it doesn't move the needle at all? Well, before we get into that philosophical question, and while everyone is still filtering in, to the live, we're going to address our continued survival. So, Mint Press is an independent newsroom and doesn't have any corporate sponsors. Mint Press has been banned from PayPal fundraisers. We've been taken down by GoFundMe, demonetized on YouTube. If you'd like to support this brand of independent journalism, consider dropping your Economist subscription and slanging $5 a month this way. It does go a long way to support independent watchdog journalism. If not, I get it. We are, after all, getting nickeled and dimed to death in contemporary society. I've mentioned this before. The convenience store right down the street from me now has a tip the cash register person because no one earns a living wage anymore. So I get it. We're just glad you're here. So speaking of sci-fi dystopias, there's one thing we have to address before we get this show rolling. It's the notion that Biden and the Democrats perhaps can save us from what's coming. And just real quick.
Now have computerized vending machines selling ammunition.
The company American Rounds said its machines use an identification scanner and facial recognition software to verify the purchaser's age. The company equates it to using a computer tablet.
So first of all, I was a big fan of the 1990s version of Cyberpunk 2020. And this is giving those vibes.
Critics argue that selling bullets out of vending machines will lead to more shootings in the U.S.
CBS News senior coordinating producer for crime and public safety, Anna Schechter, joins us now. You've been looking into this with your team for such a long time. How does this work? And help us understand the context, because for a lot of folks around the country, ammo and that necessity is a part of their lives. So this might be convenient for them.
You take your ID, you put it in the machine. It's a 2,000-pound, big, white, sleek-looking vending machine that's right in the front of the grocery store. And the machine scans your ID, checks that you're 21, and then actually does facial recognition. So you have to stand in front, like if you were at TSA or getting clear, scan your face, and they double check that your face matches your ID. So that's the extent of the check.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So it's just like clear. It's like a clear ID. In places with loose gun regulations, like Texas or Oklahoma or whatever, you could just buy a bunch of bullets because they don't track how many bullets you buy, and then just, black market sell them in the next state over. What could possibly go wrong? And of course, I'm a big fan of Cyberpunk and stuff. It's just the timeline got messed up because we're supposed to also have hover cars by now, and we don't, and that's lame. So I just wanted to let you know that that's something that happened. And moving on, this is also something that I wanted to speak more about before we jump into the main segment of tonight's episode, and that is Benjamin Netanyahu, doing his thing, doing what he said he was going to do. So a big theme for tonight's episode is hypocrisy. And, we talked about the NATO summit, everyone united against Russia. And as you know, Russia just bombed a hospital. Israel has made it a state policy to bomb hospitals. So whatever, it's totally fair game now. And, the president of Ukraine, Putin, is a war criminal and has ICC arrest warrants out for him. So he can't set foot in South Africa or Europe. And Benjamin Netanyahu has some pending warrants for himself as well, but he is still scheduled to come here on July 24th and speak at Capitol Hill. This is from last month because the media has not been reporting on this.
Johnson has said that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will address a joint meeting of the US Congress. That's a move likely to anger Democrats who are increasingly critical of Israel's war on Gaza. The White House declined to comment when asked whether it was consulted. Al Jazeera's Heidi Jo Castro has more from Washington, D.C.
The U.S. House Speaker says that a formal invitation will be issued later this week to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to appear before a joint session of the U.S. Congress. Speaker Mike Johnson made this announcement at an Israeli independence event hosted by the Israeli Embassy in Washington.
We will soon be hosting Prime Minister Netanyahu at the Capitol for a joint session of Congress. Yes. This will be a timely and I think a very strong show of support to the Israeli government in their time of greatest need.
Now, it's unclear when this address would take place, but already the planned invitation is stoking divisions. Johnson, who's a Republican, first floated the idea of inviting Netanyahu back in March. That was in response to comments from Chuck Schumer, the top Democrat in the U.S. Senate, who said that Netanyahu had lost his way in Israel's war policy in Gaza and calling for new elections. Now, it's unclear if Schumer has agreed to a joint session invitation.
Oh, and just so you know, skipping over all that, we do know what's now. It's been a month later, and I pay attention to Israeli media. So as of 2 days ago, it's still on. The media is not reporting it, but he's still scheduled to come here, and he's going to bring hostage families to fly on Netanyahu's plane to attend address to Congress. So several families plan to be on Capitol Hill, while others call on Netanyahu to call off his address. But of course, he's a political survivalist. And if the invitation is extended to him, he loves addressing our Congress. So we can definitely expect him to be here on the 24th. So I made a post about this on Instagram. We're going to be making more posts with more time, details, and general information. If you just happen to show up in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, the 24th, and you're bored and want something to do, that is, an option. It's pretty much a hobby now, But anyways, as we talk about that, and we talk about the increasing hypocrisy and the missteps that this government is making, in terms of domestic policy, blithely not listening to voters, or basically being invested in their own political survival. They're doubling down on genocide Joe Biden, and we're seeing a lot more cracks start to form, and these things do take time. Real quick, Katie says, I think he will officially have addressed U.S. Congress more than any other foreign leader if he hasn't already. I'm not sure how many times he's done it, but he's done it under like every administration. So if you recall during the Obama administration, he came and Obama was trying to get that Iran nuclear deal done. And Benjamin Netanyahu came and he spoke before Congress and he condemned the deal and kind of like torpedoed it in some ways, and it enraged Obama. So he's been meddling and speaking to our Congress forever, for a really long time. This will be the fourth. I can't pull up the internet right now. So if this is the fourth time, that's a lot. We're also going to have a Q&A later after the interview segment with Maryam Hassanein, because that's what we do here. So those Peter says those hostage families are likely protection for Netanyahu as he flies to the U.S. People have been floating the idea of a citizen's arrest, but I'm not sure that works because there's no warrant out for his arrest on U.S. soil. Because while the U.S. has funded the ICC, established it, and continues to shuck dollars at it, we are not signatories on the Rome Statute. So, we use it as a weapon and as a tool against Putin. But when it comes to our own allies, we're more discriminating with what we choose to prosecute and not prosecute. So, yes, just keep in mind that is happening. No one's been talking about it. I haven't seen any posts about it, so I did post about it today. Hopefully that will become more of a conversation. So if you guys could spread the word, that would be awesome. So I think tonight we are going to just go ahead and dive right into our main segment. We're going to talk to, as I said, a former Biden political appointee who just resigned last week. And this is one of the first appointees that's come forward who's not a member of the State Department. It's from an ancillary department, which we're going to get into presently. So I will be posting article links and stuff that we reference in the interview in the comments section, and whatever else strikes my fancy. So here we go, guys. So on November 13th, The Guardian published an article describing a memo wherein 100 U.S. government officials from the State Department and the International Development Agency criticized the White House for disregarding the lives of Palestinians and showing an, quote, unwillingness to de-escalate in the Israel-Hamas war. The heedless violence, the disregard for international law, the rank hypocrisy manifested between the Russia and Ukraine and Israel-Palestine conflicts have undoubtedly complicated the jobs of the U.S. diplomatic corps. According to a Politico article published the week prior, a memo stated that the distance between America's private and public messaging, quote, contributes to a regional public perception that the United States is a biased and dishonest actor, which at best does not advance and at worst harms U.S. interests worldwide. So State Department officials have resigned and described submitting complaints to the Department of State Dissent channel. We're going to link that below so you can look into that yourself. Likewise, a string of service members in the United States Armed Forces have filed for conscientious objector status. So those who detest war and champion diplomatic solutions applaud these symbolic acts of dissent and resistance. Yet the question remains, what do they really accomplish in terms of influencing a demonstrably self-destructive foreign policy stance? Well, upon examining the turnover rate and the President Biden's A-team and cabinet, we see that senior position resignations are no greater than those of prior administrations. And even accounting for this turbulent past year, they are significantly below former President Trump's. But it's pretty much in keeping with everything else before. So ultimately, it's difficult to gauge the internal political climate within an administration from the outside. So tonight on State of Play, we interview Maryam Hassanein, a political appointee at the U.S. Interior Department and the most recent to resign as the Biden administration continues to fund and enable Israel's genocide of Palestinians. So Special Assistant and Assistant Secretary for Land and Minerals Management, Hassanein, has said in her statement last week, quote, marginalized communities in our country have long been denied the justice they deserve. I joined the Biden-Harris administration with the belief that my voice and diverse perspective would lend a hand in the pursuit of that justice. We will link your statement below. And thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so it's been a little over a week since you resigned. In hindsight, how do you feel about your decision to leave the administration?
Yeah, it was certainly a decision that I thought about and grappled with for a while, and I think that really it was something I thought deeply about. So post resignation, I certainly do feel like I think my main aim and my main objective was to stand by my morals and my values and what I felt like was right. And I certainly feel like my resignation was me doing that. So I think I feel like a little bit of, I don't think relief is the right word, but it's the closest word. I think that, it's hard to say that I'm relieved or that other resignees are relieved when when atrocities are still taking place in Gaza and at a rate which there have been reports this week that the massacres and the attacks have been really at their worst. So definitely, relieved in the sense I'm no longer grappling with this really difficult decision, but disheartened to see the Biden administration still continue on in this path that we saw yesterday. That the Wall Street Journal reported that the pause on shipments of 500-pound bombs is continuing. So I think there's definitely still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a military background, and those 500-pound bombs, the horrible contradiction in there is like they're not even the 2,000-pound bombs are big enough and don't have the penetrative power to collapse the tunnel network. So it's all completely performative. And I just wanted to touch on for the audience, we've been talking about this for a long time, but the reason the massacres have gotten so bad over the past week is because they're closer to a ceasefire deal. So Israel's trying to put pressure on Hamas and PIJ to accept terms that are not favorable to them by collectively punishing the civilians. So nothing new there. The Biden administration turning a blind eye is kind of mind-boggling, especially when we see yesterday, because like the NATO summit, we were just watching the NATO summit. It ends tonight. We were seeing all of this outrage over Russia bombing one hospital, whereas they bombed 36 in Gaza. So yeah, the hypocrisy is kind of mind-boggling. But with regards to your position within the Biden administration, so far we've at least it's come on most people's radar. So far, only seen like State Department officials and congressional aides resign in protest. Those were more directly involved in policy. So I guess what was the final straw for you? Was there anything in particular that made you decide to take the final step, or was it just came to a point where you just like, I can't do this anymore? And were there any like internal discussions that you had with your colleagues, like watching this, or did you feel like isolated in your opinions about what's happening in the Middle East?
Yeah, I think that, what I really came to realize throughout the past couple of months is just what it means to be a political appointee. And just for context, political appointees are placed at the various agencies within the executive branch to solely really kind of to further the president's agenda in that agency. So really you are associated, you're a part of the administration, you're associated with the administration, therefore the actions of the administration are something that you have to take on by proxy, if that makes sense. So I think that I really, just saw that although I'm at Interior, where it's not, we're not producing foreign policy on this, we're not dealing with Gaza, we're not dealing with these issues directly. I think just being within the administration, allows for, and especially being an appointee, allows for the administration to continue on as if everything is normal during a time in which, we see the administration having a hand in carrying out and helping Israel carry out a genocide, which is so far beyond not normal. So I think, with that kind of thinking in mind, I just felt that I felt it necessary to recognize my role and recognize my responsibility, and felt it necessary to resign. And in terms of, the conversations that were had, I think that I will say at Interior, it wasn't so generally talked about. I think that I myself had personal conversations with colleagues, but really I think it was a nature of it didn't come up because it wasn't related to the work, but it also was kind of like this ignoring the elephant in the room, because I think, 9 months in, it's undeniable that not everyone knew exactly what was going on, and not everyone knew exactly, just what's happening. And I myself would see all these atrocities taking place on my phone during breaks or during lunch or whenever, and then I'd have to go back and it's like as if nothing was happening. And I think that was just a really strange feeling. And I hope that, my resignation, along with other people's resignations, contributes to, a culture that's not silencing, a culture that, our jobs are inherently political, and this is, an issue that is political. So it should be okay to be talked about, and people should feel, empowered to say their opinion. And I really hope that resignations kind of lead to that too.
And have you been noticing a trend, like just within your own sphere of people becoming more aware, talking about it in the workplace, voicing discontent, or is it still an elephant in the room that people don't want to talk about 9 months? And I know there's an element of towing the party line. People have their livelihoods tied up in what they're doing. They're public servants. Healthcare is not easy to come by. A lot of benefits aren't easy to come by. So I was talking to some of the conscientious objectors the week before last from the Air Force, and it was the same thing within the military sphere. It's like, that's your livelihood. You might not have an exit plan or any like parachute when you leave, but just from your own experience, is there a sort of like vocal discontent, or is it just like peer to peer? Just like a couple of people you may know within the workplace that have the same views, or maybe not at all. Maybe it's just not even talked about.
Yeah.
That's from the outside. It's hard to get like a gauge or to judge what that looks like internally.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, I would say really there is dissent there, and there is this, idea that people who are working there people who are working within the administration, within the executive branch, really truly don't agree with this, with the Biden administration's policy on this. So there's that dissent there, but it really, to me, it doesn't show up in, I think it shows up more in those one-on-one conversations. I think it shows up more in just personal, actions too, that federal employees have planned. There's a group, Feds United for Peace, who pushes for a better approach to this. Who are there is also that, like you mentioned, there's livelihoods on the line. So I think a lot of it is anonymously done, right? I think Feds United for Peace, and also staffers for Ceasefire, which is both Capitol Hill and Biden administration. There's obviously conversations there, and there's obviously dissent there, but just by the nature of people being afraid to speak out and to put their names and their faces associated with saying we disagree with this, it all has to kind of be done anonymously, which is limiting, really.
Yeah, I've become kind of cynical. There were mechanisms for dissent in the military too, but I came to realize like they want you to go through the proper channels, and they control the channels, so they're pretty sure they won't work. So there's that as well, and I think a lot of people just watching this from the outside are kind of flabbergasted in a way that nothing's changing, and of course I look back to precedent like the Vietnam backlash that took like 10 years of massive dissent to end. So there is a recognition that these things do take time to slow the massive cogs of bureaucracy and government. But I was just wondering what your sense of how the Biden administration views the war in Gaza and the backlash to it. There have been reports that a lot of officials in the Biden administration didn't expect this amount of blowback. So I was wondering if you could comment on that at all.
Yeah, I think that, certainly that this is really just kind of my gauge and my opinion. I don't think it's based in any, of my real life experiences, but what it seems like from their actions is that they really view they just view this as like necessary in their hands. It's like a necessary evil. They see Palestinians as collateral damage to this larger, alleged goal of theirs that, they're trying to combat certain things within the region. But really, I mean, what it's come down to is we've seen that these alleged goals, Israel is not in line with these alleged goals by raids in the West Bank and rejecting ceasefire deals in the past that would have released the hostages. We can kind of see and understand that Israel is saying one thing, Israeli leaders are saying one thing and acting out in another way. So really, there's just a huge disconnect, and I'm not sure. I feel like they have to see that disconnect and they have to understand it, and maybe then there's just this idea of we see this for what it is and we understand it for what it is, and we still are staying steadfast and our support of Israel, and that could be for a number of reasons. But I certainly think it's not a smart thing. It's not something that is advisable to like continue by an ally of ours, regardless of what that ally does. I think that just sets a really dangerous precedent. It sets, hey, you can do whatever you want, you can commit whatever atrocities you want, and we'll always be behind you. And for what? For the sake of allyship? I think that's just a very horrible stance to take, in all honesty. So yeah, I think that I would say they view it as that, and I think they also seem to think that maybe this will all blow over at some point. That maybe the dissent they're seeing, the protests they're seeing, that people will eventually, in a way get over it, or in a way, forget about it. And I think that's very wrong. I think we've seen. And I've heard from myself from going to peaceful demonstrations, rallies. I've heard from organizers saying this is the most support for Palestine that we've seen within our lifetimes. Like, I definitely don't think this is going away, and I think they also have an idea in their head. I think campaign leaders may have an idea in their head that there's always this idea that maybe people will vote against something because they keep looming a Trump presidency as like, we have to stop the Trump presidency and we have to, stop Project 2025. But I think that I can kind of speak for myself and maybe other young people, other Muslims, two very critical voting blocs, that it's not enough to vote against something. You have to vote for something. You have to really show, tangible change, and that just isn't what they are doing. So I think come November, maybe they're hoping that there is, a forcing of a hand, like forcing our hands and having to vote. But I think that, as others have said, a vote is definitely earned and it's not entitled. So I think that their sentiments really don't prove to be true among the general or among the populations that are against this policy.
Well, it just seems like everything they're doing is very detached from what's going on the ground. So first of all, I mean, I could definitely see this blowing over, like it did during the unfortunately named Global War on Terror, which lasted 20 years. That eventually fizzled out. But that was also during a time where millennials could afford a house. You could, in theory, in 5 years, you could buy a house. You could have like some sort of stability in your life, which doesn't really exist the way it used to. And we're starting to see it like connected to an entire system, not just to an individual issue. So, I mean, what I generally say is like organizers or activists kind of organize and mobilize against an issue like BLM. And then I think it was Kwame Ture said that revolutionaries organize against systems. So it's kind of changed because this like mass awakening that's happened after October 7th and the subsequent months, they're kind of seeing it connecting to all these other problems that exist as part of an entire system. So the big voting thing. And I just want to say, like, it's also out of touch in a way that it just seems like this is very Cold War policy. We're gonna fight Russia no matter what. We're going to give them more aid, even though like there is a diplomatic solution. A lot of people have started questioning U.S. foreign policy because of what's happening in Palestine. Now they're starting to question like the history before Russia invaded and the subsequent history before Russia invaded, and it's not as one-sided as it's just straight up Russian aggression like it was meant to be. But that's kind of beyond the scope of what we're talking about. But it seems like this old Cold War stuff. We're going to double down on wars. And then we're going to double down on providing arms, ammunition to our proxies in other parts of the world. And no matter what anybody says, we're going to go do it anyways. But you should still vote for us because Trump is going to be worse. Now, as a political appointee who I'm sure you may be in contact with other people that are still within the administration. Is there a concern that they might be out of a job in November?
I mean, I think certainly it's never guaranteed. It's never,
Right.
You go into these jobs knowing that. I mean, I wouldn't say, I think that's also something that's not very spoken up, I think that all across the board, there's really a culture of, and understandably so, you're there as an appointee, you're there to further the president's agenda. So you can't really, in the same venue, voice, I don't think he's going to win, or I don't think, I disagree with this. So I hadn't really heard that while I was there, and right now haven't necessarily heard that too much from former colleagues. But I would not doubt that that's on their minds, especially with not even just the Gaza issue, but also the whole stepping down issue. Like, is he going to step down? Is he, he's getting calls every day from members of Congress to step down. So it's surely something on everyone's radar.
Yeah, they're not being public about it yet. It's just breaking right now that as we're recording this, that Senator Chuck Schumer is kind of telegraphing to donors that he's willing to not endorse Biden and call for him to step down. And once he goes, that's kind of like the domino effect, right? So, okay, it just seems even more politically more and more tenuous, but it does see, and I've never been in a part of a government institution like in the military. You toe the line of the executive branch. So I'm not sure how dissatisfaction is voiced within government circles, aside from like the dissent channel that we talked about. But I think their ability, their capacity to toe the line on this has been kind of stunning, because the debate performance was not as awe-inspiring as they would have liked. So did that affect anything? Because that happened before you left. So was there any conversation about that? Like,
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of like, I think it maybe impacted. I don't want to say impacted I was very much so watching the debate to see if he would say anything different about the Palestine issue. And I think they
didn't even mention it.
Yeah. I think it was mentioned as in, we are the biggest supporter of Israel and the world, which, I mean, I think for me, like, really solidified. Okay. I think if anything, it just solidified my decision. In terms of like his performance and whatnot, not, that didn't have a hand in my decision. But I think that, again, I would say, like, even if people felt some type of way, it would just never be said. And at least in the, like, spheres that I was in. Again, I think individually, I certainly have come up in conversations of like, that was bad. That was a bad performance. And that was not really, it didn't inspire a lot of hope for what's to come in a few months. So yeah, I would say that's kind of my read on, or my experience with the situation.
Yeah, and for those of us who are kind of invested in what's going on, that are generally anti-war, it's just kind of sad that it took him being almost incoherent to be like, okay, this is a problem. Not the fact that we're, funding a forever war in Eastern Europe. We're doing a genocide in Palestine, and we're looking to create a flashpoint in Taiwan. That's not even a part of it. It's just, can he beat Trump? And this is kind of like beyond what I wanted to ask you. I just kind of have a hot take, like, theory. It's like, I'm sure some movers and shakers and power brokers in the DNC would be fine if Biden lost, because then they get to just make everything about Trump. Oh, Trump did this. We don't have to talk about these messy issues like an ongoing, like another $60 billion to Ukraine and then like more bombs to Israel. Like, even if those are unpopular, we could be like, oh, see, it was Trump doing it. So that's some of like the theoretical like counter arguments I've heard to a Trump presidency. At least people on the liberal side would be more active about what's going on. So it's just hard to like needing to remind yourself about the complacency of most people, and bearing that in mind, it brings me back to one of the comments from your statement that you said, marginalized communities in our country have long been denied the justice they deserve. You joined this administration with the belief that you could help that in some way. You could further that cause, lend a hand in pursuit of that justice. It's not just the Palestine issue, but there's also like an unprecedented level of deportations going on under the administration. He's put more cops on the ground and expanded police funding. Would you say you may be a little disillusioned? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it does seem like everything that's happened makes everything a little bit worse.
Yeah, I think that, being a person of color, being especially Muslim, is seeing the 2016, like the Trump presidency, and its effects. I think so. In 2020, that was the first election that I could vote in, like in terms of eligibility, and really what it was that to me, President Biden, I'm sure to a lot of others, I think it was this idea that we're coming off this Trump presidency, and we've seen really horrible things taking place, and President Biden, the Biden campaign at that time provided some sense of hope, some sense of, I think they were really playing on themes of justice and having trying to deliver justice to marginalized communities. So yeah, for a few years or for a couple years, that was that was my belief. I thought that the Biden administration was doing good, and I will say, like, I do think that there are good things being done by the administration. I think that I certainly don't want to discredit that, but I also think that that's very automatically overshadowed and offset by other, this continuous support of Israel and some of the things that you mentioned of really a harsh immigration policy. So I think that it definitely was just offset in that sense. And I will say, it was a little bit disillusioning to see all of that and continue to see all of this taking place. I think that I still have hope that, there is a few months. I think that unfortunately we have seen a lot of harm take place, but there's also opportunity to, and whether they do this on a moral obligation or an electoral obligation, I'm not sure, but I think there's really an opportunity to reverse course, and to kind of try to fix those wrongs. I think the very first step is recognizing there's wrongs in place. I think that's really the kind of battle there, and then unfortunately we just don't have a lot of time to sit there and try to get the administration leaders and decision makers to that place, but we can also just try. I think that's the theme there.
So you're not a complete cynic yet. Awesome. Do you think you'd work again in government?
Yeah, I have been grappling with it. I think I really did so I came to DC. That was my first career was in federal government, because I honestly did have this idea. I was a justice studies major in college, which was social justice based, and I had this idea that government could be used as a vehicle to enact change. Of course, I think that maybe that's just youngness and feeling like very bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and hopeful. And I don't want to give up on that hope yet, because I do think that government as it stands can do good. I unfortunately just think with leaders who aren't willing to really tap into that and to really I don't know. I don't want it to come across as like I think that there's we can reach this like utopian type of thing, because we can't. Like, I do recognize that there's always gonna not be, it's never gonna be perfect, and government's never gonna be this like very just incredibly positive thing. But I do think that there is power there and there is potential there. So I don't know if I would return to government, but we will see.
Yeah, I mean, I change my political beliefs on the reg and where I stand from day to day, especially with how insane everything is right now. So, I'm going to be in DC for the protests on the 24th when Netanyahu comes into town. The fact that that's still happening, given everything that's going on, just have to say one more time for the record, not the best political move. But then again, we're all learning about certain lobbies and special interests, which, influence our government. But I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on, giving us your perspective. And, we definitely respect the decision that you made, along with others, to, take a stance and say, nah, we're really not going to do this anymore. And appreciate you coming on again, and wish you all the best in your future endeavors.
Thank you.
All right. There we go. Mic's back on. Okay. Yeah. So that was a interview with Maryam. Still got some faith in the fact that governmental change can be achieved. And we do need people who care in government. Despite my mounting disillusionment, again, this is an editorial show, so I can be as disillusioned as I want to. All right. But yeah, definitely respect that decision. Hope to see more people, get out. But then again, we have to recognize that people do need jobs, and finding ones these days that have benefits is very, very difficult. So I'm glad. We've got a lot of feedback for the interview. Seems like you guys enjoyed it. I think she's great. Thanks so much for watching. Okay, now that we're talking about what else is going on, we're going to transition to live Q&A with the last 11 and a half minutes. So what do we got? First off, oh yeah, again, best handle ever. Bill Nye, the highest guy, asks, why do you believe that Russia bombed the hospital? I've heard analysis from Scott Ritter that it was a Ukrainian air defense missile. Okay. Well, I didn't say I necessarily was taking a position on it either for or yes. That's just how the media is reporting it. And that's just what was said at the NATO summit. So, first of all, I mean, I did spend some time. I'm not a munitions expert. I did spend some time looking at the missile. And I would like to say, first of all, that, I mean, technically, I guess it could have been a misfired air defense, a missile from the Patriot battery. That happens very rarely. And we do have to acknowledge that a Ukrainian missile apparently hit a beach in Crimea like a weeks ago. I forget, was it last week or the week before, from one of the ATACMS rocket artillery platforms, and killed some people and wounded some people. And I guess it was intercepted and it fell on the beach. And hang on, I'm getting a private chat. Okay, yeah, sorry. It fell on the beach, and so that's how a Ukrainian munition hit Crimea and killed some people. I have looked at the imagery. It doesn't look like a Patriot. From what we can tell, the grainy imagery that exists, it doesn't look like a Patriot missile, interceptor missile. It does look closer to the KH-101. But then you'd have to ask yourself, like, okay, so if you can't make a positive identification on what the missile actually was, you'd have to analyze trajectory. Was it coming from the Russian side? What was it coming from the Ukrainian side? Where was it impacting, and what was the trajectory? I don't have that information, which is why I haven't looked. I've been busy just like reading up on NATO stuff, but that's why I haven't been making my own personal determination. I just will ask this question: why would Russia, unless there was a big mistake, bomb a hospital right before a NATO peace summit? That's like the worst propaganda you could give the enemy. So doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, Russia's definitely bombed hospitals before in the past, but they're playing a different game than they were playing 2 years ago. So, yeah, I don't know. There's a fog of war element. It just doesn't make a lot of sense for Russia to do that. Ukraine definitely benefits way more from the information war. But it also doesn't look like a Patriot missile. So I'm going to plead the fifth on the fog of war with that. I haven't looked into it enough. Sorry about that. So, Greg, can you give us a realistic scenario how the Zionist entity will fall? Okay. Everybody's saying that the Zionists will collapse and die after this genocide, but how? They still got army nukes, etc. So when I look at this, you know, we see their economy, like, and I brought this up before, even at the end of Q4, the last financial quarter of last year, only after a couple months of war, their GDP had shrunk by almost 20%. Hundreds of thousands of settlers have fled the country, hurting their army even more. You've got mass displacements. It's like, how do they have the economy to keep going? So we do expect like a quick collapse. But then again, they still have unconditional support. And so we have to look at another apartheid for precedent or maybe some guidance. And I will recognize that things are happening faster now than they happened in the past. But South Africa, like, they went from like 1964 from being a pariah state to 1988. They didn't participate in the Olympics because of a a world boycott of their apartheid system of government. So that lasted forever. Everybody knew what South Africa was. Everybody knew how bad they were, but it still took them forever to become dismantled. So, I mean, yes, they weren't doing a genocide. They weren't engaged in a war that they have demonstrably lost. But all I want to do is bring up that precedent for it taking a long time still. So, yes, I do think that it will not, it will collapse eventually. But I do think it still has a bit more life in it, unless something like civil strife between like liberal Zionists in the cities and like hardcore ultra-Orthodox Judean settlers get into it, and there could be a civil war situation. But no, this will still take time. The thing is, it's going to have to take time because it's going to take years for people to finally get educated and get on the right side of this. It's going to take a long time to, like, they weren't even banned from Eurovision. Like, they haven't really progressed into pariah statehood yet. Like, yes, we're BDSing, but it's just us. It's just people involved in the movement. Like, they are not banned from the Olympics yet, or like the World Cup, or anything like that. So still have a ways to go. But here's the thing. Gaza is a gaping wound that will never heal. So that's not going away. The question of Palestinian statehood because of Gaza is never going to go away again. There's going to be no putting it back on a cold storage. So this is going to continue to hurt the credibility of Israel going forward, and they will never recover from this. They won't recover economically. They won't recover militarily. They will not recover politically or morally. So, yeah, there's only one way to go, and it's down. So eventually, yes, it will happen, but it's not going to happen, I don't think, as quickly as people are hoping it will. So, okay, estimated how many people will show up in D.C. on the 24th. I already know that because I'm in group chats, like a ton of vets are going to show up, veterans. We're going to wear like OCP fatigues. But in terms of people, I don't know. Like, it's a Wednesday. People have jobs. Not everybody can make it. So hopefully a lot, but I cannot even begin to guess on numbers. So again, it's a work day. That's why they, he's going to speak to Congress. Congress is in session only on weekdays. So yeah, there's no way around it. So it's definitely going to hurt numbers, but hopefully a good chunk of people still show up. What do you think of the analysis of Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson? I mean, I think he's one of the guys who's also saying it's going to take a long time. I think he says like 10 or 20 years, right? Yeah, he's an impressive guy. He's also a member of Veterans for Peace, so we're part of the same organization. He's just like he was the chief of staff for Colin Powell, so yeah, far more experienced than I am. But he's been pretty. He's been right since the entire thing's been going on. Definitely agree with the fundamental loss of American soft power as hurting us irreparably. I think that's one point that we don't talk about enough. And I want to do a whole thing about soft power, the ability to influence and co-opt rather than to coerce, because it can be lost really quickly and it can be gained really quickly. Like, nobody expect the Houthis to gain a bunch of soft power so quickly. Like, I know a number of people from Yemen who hated the Houthis because when they took Sana'a, they just like murdered a bunch of people. So they actually considered them to be terrorists. But since they've been one of the only groups fighting for Palestine, they're like, oh, you know what? I think they're okay now. And that happened in months. So soft power can be gained and lost really quickly. But when you lose it, it's kind of hard to get it back again. And so that's what is happening with America. And that affects everything because we're no longer looking like a stable or rational actor on the global scene. So who would you rather do business with? A crazy person who's enabling a genocide, who doesn't even follow his own rules, like the ICC, the ICJ, UN resolutions, or someone like, China, who is stable, doesn't bomb a bunch of countries. Yeah, I mean, I would argue they have a lot of imperialist tendencies. I know some people like Marxists and Leninists would say that, no, China can't be imperialist because that only applies to like the Western form of imperialism. But I don't know. I just have too many people I know in the Congo who are like academics who definitely make compelling arguments that China is an imperialist power. They just do it differently. But anyways, who would you rather work with? The West, who's bombing everything, or something that's more stable, more mutually beneficial, trying to build industrial capacity while doing mineral extraction for sure within other countries? And won't bomb you and generally does what it says. You're going to want to work with China. So we're seeing this massive influence, and it's going to take a long time for that to really show. But it's irreparable. It's going to happen. Please do a soft power thing. Okay, we're going to talk about soft power in the future then. And just like BRICS, all this stuff is going to take time. It's going to take a long time to de-dollarize and stuff. But it's it's going to take probably a longer time than you think for Israel to be dismantled. But the thing is, it's past the point of no return. These things are like pretty much guaranteed to happen now. That's the thing. So what are the most substantial ways the public can put pressure on these systems to create change? Okay, first of all, a real easy one, Democrats losing elections because they don't listen to their freaking voters. That could be something that puts immediate pressure on the DNC. Otherwise, they're going to become irrelevant. If they cannot win elections, they will become irrelevant. So they're actually going to have to start listening for a change. That's one way. Continue to like BDS. And one thing that people didn't expect this backlash for the Israel-Palestine thing. I think one of the biggest things we can do is like to be patient with people who still aren't on board. Like, I know if you've been invested in this thing for since for me, it was definitely since before October 7th. I just didn't think there was any hope for it until like mid-October. But now there's definitely hope, I'd say. But most people still aren't even tracking. Like we talked about it in the interview. People don't care about the genocide happening in Palestine. They cared more about Biden talking about golf incoherently with Trump, right? So this is going to take a long time to educate people. So I think like education is the main thing, like learning how to talk to people and not being like, what do you mean? We're like 9 months in. Where the F have you been? What's your problem? Don't you care? So not being like that and not gatekeeping it. Because remember, we look at precedents. I brought up South Africa, and I'm going to bring up Vietnam again. 10 years. Year 9, they were still getting people on board to be against the Vietnam War. So we have to have the same mentality. So I think that's actually one of the big ways and the often overlooked ways that we can help end this thing eventually. But again, it's going to take time. So thank you guys so much for watching. That's a wrap for tonight. And yeah, you guys have a great weekend. Hopefully a bunch of crazy stuff doesn't happen, but we're going to be back on Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to look at this NATO conference because it's monumentally important. They're expanding into the Middle East more. Biden is like, mistaking Zelensky for Putin. And oh yeah, we're gonna end with that little moment of bliss. So yeah, next Monday, the weekend rules news roll up. Probably going to focus on NATO unless something else crazy happens. But here's your moment of bliss. Good night and good luck, as Moreau used to say.
President of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin.
Oh, whoops. And that's a wrap. Cheers, y'all.